As I was cleaning out the basement, one of those long overdue chores I had been putting off for years, I stumbled across a box I didn't recognize. It was shoved deep in the corner, covered in dust and cobwebs, as if it had been waiting there, untouched, for decades. I almost missed it, but something about the box drew me in, like it wanted to be found. I wiped the grime off and opened it. Inside were a few random things, old books, some broken tools, but what really caught my eye was a VHS tape. It had no label, no markings, nothing to indicate what it was. Just a blank, black tape, slightly worn with age. I couldn't remember ever owning any tapes like this, and the fact that it was buried so deep made me even more curious. I turned it over in my hands, trying to piece together where it had come from. But no memories surfaced, just that nagging feeling in my gut. One part dread, 2 parts intrigue. Against my better judgment, I decided to play it. I set up my old VHS player, dusted it off, and popped the tape in. For a moment, nothing happened. Just static, buzzing softly through the speakers. Then, the screen flickered and an old-school title screen appeared. Pixelated, crude graphics like something straight out of the early 90s. It was a game. The title was gibberish, like someone had mashed the keyboard, but I could make out a start option. At first, it seemed like any typical retro game. Simple controls. A generic character walking through a dark, eerie forest. The music was strange, though low, distorted, as if it was slightly out of tune. I brushed it off as a glitch, but then other things started to feel wrong. The game would glitch for a second, freezing in the middle of gameplay, but when it resumed, something would change. Trees in the background would warp, the character's sprite would distort, its eyes widening unnaturally. The deeper I went, the stranger it got. And then there were the sounds. At first, just faint, like static or whispers buried in the game's music. But the more I played, the more pronounced they became, until I could swear I heard my name being whispered through the speakers. Every step I took in the game felt deliberate, like I was being guided somewhere, not by the game's programming, but by something else entirely. I paused for a moment, taking in a shaky breath. That's when I felt it, this creeping sensation that I wasn't alone in the room. I looked around, my eyes darting to the shadows, but of course, no one was there. It was just me. But that feeling didn't go away. And that's when I noticed something even more unsettling. The game seemed to be reacting to me. Not my inputs, but me. I stood up to stretch, and the character in the game did the same. I shifted my weight, and it mirrored me. It wasn't a coincidence. It was as if the game was watching me, and worse, responding to me. As I kept playing, things around the house started to feel off. It was subtle at first. A cold draft I hadn't noticed before, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I figured it was just the basement being, well, a basement. But then it got worse. I was deep into the game, my character walking through this decaying, pixelated house when I heard a sound. A soft thud coming from upstairs. I paused, straining to listen, but the house was silent. Too silent. I shook it off, thinking maybe I was getting paranoid. But when I unpaused the game, the same thing happened on screen. My character heard a noise from another room in the game's house. I laughed nervously, convincing myself it was a coincidence. But as I played on, more things started happening. Objects in the game would fall or move, and seconds later, I'd hear a similar sound in my own house, like something had shifted, fallen, or been moved just out of sight. Then the temperature dropped. I could see my breath fogging up in front of me, which made no sense since it hadn't been cold before. The game's screen flickered, the sound warping like it was struggling to keep playing. But I couldn't look away. My character was now walking through a dark hallway, and so was I, in my own house, every step in the game echoing around me like it was happening in real life. That's when I noticed the shadows. They moved. Not in a normal way, not like a trick of the light. These shadows stretched unnaturally, shifting in the corners of my vision, almost like they were watching. I tried to tell myself it was just the game messing with my head. But then the messages started. They appeared on screen, written in the same strange, garbled text, but I understood them perfectly. Stop playing, I froze. I hadn't pressed any buttons. The game was talking to me. Another message flashed. You're not safe. I reached for the power button, ready to end it. But before I could, the screen glitched violently, and one final message burned itself into the screen. It's too late. After that last message, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the sounds from the game, the whispers, the thuds, and I could still feel the cold creeping through the house. Something was seriously wrong, and I needed to know what I had gotten myself into. The next day, I started digging. First, I searched for any information about the game. I tried describing the gameplay, the glitches, even the strange messages, but nothing came up. It was like the game didn't exist. But after hours of searching, I finally found a thread buried deep in an old forum, one that hadn't been active in years. There was a post about a lost game from the 90s, something that had never been officially released. According to the post, it was developed by a small, independent group who worked on it in secret. But something happened, something that no one could explain. The game never made it to the public because every person involved in its creation vanished. No explanations, no trace. Just gone. At first, I thought it was some urban legend, the kind of creepy story people tell online to freak each other out. But the more I read, the more I realized there was something darker behind it. The group behind the game was known for experimenting with strange, unsettling ideas, creating games that didn't just entertain but got into your head, twisted your perception of reality. There were rumors of cursed tapes, games that could manipulate people, even drive them to madness. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was being watched again, like something didn't want me to know the truth. My internet started acting weird. Glitches, sudden disconnects, my screen flickering just like in the game. I almost stopped, but I couldn't. I needed to know. Then I found it. A single post from someone claiming they had played the same game. They described everything I was experiencing. The strange sounds, the cold, the feeling of being watched. But their post ended abruptly mid-sentence. No follow-up, no explanation. Just silence. I tried to track down the user, but their account was gone. Erased. Like they never existed. That's when I realized this game wasn't just some obscure, forgotten piece of history. It was something else entirely. Something cursed, something meant to do more than just scare. It was a trap, designed to pull you in, and once you were inside, it didn't let go. I wanted to stop. After everything I had read, everything I had experienced, I knew I should have just destroyed the tape, thrown it in the trash, burned it, anything. But I couldn't shake this pull, this gnawing need to finish the game. It was like it had its claws in me, and the more I tried to resist, the harder it became. I made one last attempt to play, to see if there was some kind of ending, some way out. But the second I pressed play, I knew it was a mistake. The game didn't start where I left off. It skipped ahead, plunging me into a nightmarish version of my own house. The pixelated walls and rooms were eerily familiar, too familiar. It was my basement, the one I was sitting in. The shadows in the game stretched and writhed, moving just like they had in my house. My character stood still, unblinking, waiting. Then, without warning, the game began to glitch violently, the screen warping as the character's face twisted into something grotesque, its eyes wide and staring directly at me. I reached for the power button, but it didn't work. The game kept playing, and my TV screen flickered, the image distorting, then returning to that familiar scene. My basement. But now, something was in the game that wasn't there before. A figure, standing in the corner of the room, hidden in the shadows. It didn't move. It just watched. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not from the game, but from upstairs. My heart pounded in my chest as the footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs toward the basement. I shot up, but the room felt wrong. The walls felt closer, like the space was shrinking, bending around me. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Was I still in the game? Or was the game in here with me? The figure in the game stepped forward, coming into the light. It was me, a pixelated version of myself, staring back at me through the screen, moving with an unnatural, jerky motion. I screamed at it to stop, but it mirrored my every move, every panicked breath. And then the final message appeared on the screen. "You're next." The lights in my basement flickered, and the shadows in the room shifted again. But this time, they weren't just in the corners of my vision. They were real, dark, swirling shapes that seemed to crawl out of the walls, reaching for me. I ran for the door, but it wouldn't open. The temperature dropped again, freezing, and my breath came out in ragged gasps. The game's music twisted into a low, guttural hum, and I could feel someone, right behind me. With one last burst of strength, I yanked the tape from the player, but it was too late. The force from within the game, it had crossed over. I could feel it, cold and malevolent, wrapping around me like invisible fingers. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just fighting to stop the game. I was fighting for my life, for my sanity. I stumbled back, tearing at the walls, the air, anything to escape. And as I did, the screen flickered one last time, showing a distorted, frozen image of myself, trapped inside the game. My reflection, grinning. The tape in my hands was nothing but static now, but the feeling, that presence, it hasn't left. I'm still not sure if I ever really escaped.